if leaders don't demonstrate that they're open, that they're curious and they're adaptable, then they can't be the role models that the rest of the people are going to need. Welcome everyone to this exclusive Nobody Studios Culture live stream series. And for those of you that are joining us for the first time, Nobody Studios is a high velocity crowd infused venture studio. And our goal is to build 100 companies, compelling companies in the next 5 years. And one of our core values at the studio is that we're irrationally global. And so the ability to navigate through cultural differences is something that we're going to have to get really good at, right? And so there's no one better to have this conversation with than our Global Director of Growth and Development at Nobody Studios, Michael Landers. Welcome back to the show, Michael. Thank you so much, Angel. Good to be here. Hi, everybody. Hi, nobodies. Hi, no nobodies. Michael, this is an important conversation. And for those of you that don't know Michael, he joined me on this live stream over a year ago in March. So all of our prior live streams are on our YouTube channel at Nobody Crowd. Definitely check out the session I did with Michael, because I watched it last night. And really, this is sort of a conversation that's continuing. We're building on that prior conversation, because in that one, we really focused in on, how do we avoid culture clashes that might happen when you're dealing with people, whether they're customers or other nobodies, or anybody, that's located in a different environment than you, that may have experienced a different culture. We're not always going to see eye to eye. And Michael gave some really, really good advice and strategies for people to start putting into play at their organizations. And then today, what I really wanted to focus with Michael on is that we have just announced to our team that we're going to be launching what I call Cultural Intelligence Series. And basically, it's a series based on Michael's what he calls cultural ROI method, and really designed to equip our global team with the agility so that they can adjust their behaviors and expectations in real time when they're interacting with people from various backgrounds all over the world. So Michael, to kick it off, I've learned a little bit about the ROI method. I'm going through the program myself. We've talked about it. What motivated you to create this program? I'm a huge fan, obviously. That's why I recommended it to our chief nobody. Through it. And also just want to say, it's so interesting. It's so great to continue to have conversations with you, Sejal. And going back on the conversations we have is really, for me, the message of how culture continuously has to be iterated and evolves, whether you want it to or not, right? Because time passes, people change, behaviors shift, values shift, things happen in the world, and that's constant. Culture's constantly evolving, so it's always a thing, or at least it's changing. Hopefully it evolves. I had the experience of being born in the United States, but growing up overseas. So from 3 to 18, I lived in countries throughout Latin America. And what I realized later in life was that experience forced me into the ROI. But it wasn't always a positive one. I don't think the return on investment I got as a younger child was so great in the moment. It was challenging. It was difficult. And then even I saw my parents and other adults go through a similar experience where it wasn't amazing. They weren't getting the greatest return on investment that they could have. One of the reasons that I came up with the method was to kind of help people through it. And for those of you who don't know, the ROI for the cultural ROI stands for recognize, open, and identify. And I think we'll go through some of those, if not all three of them today. And so that bout of living overseas for me, when I look back on it as a younger adult in my 20s, allowed me to all the things that I wasn't recognizing in the moment, but I was reacting to. And so the method that I came up with was to help people, and myself, more important, react less and recognize more. Yeah, that's so important. I mean, and as we continue to strive at the studio to put people first, right? Understanding and embracing cultural differences, it starts with us, each one of us, right? And for organizations, we both have worked with lots of organizations all over the world, and leadership buy-in, right? That is something that is so critical for making sure that whether it's this program or any of the cultural sort of initiatives that we're going to implement, if we don't have leadership buy-in, I think we struggle. And so, I wanted to kind of pick your brain on, this is something that I know some of my clients have come to me with is like, there are challenges to getting that leadership support. What are some of those challenges, and how can people overcome them?
Yeah, so I really like that question, and this is something I want to hear from you as well, which is, what has been the spectrum of our individual experiences with this challenge? I'm going to share some, and then you can add to it, and we can kind of go back and forth on that. So let's take a look at, there's different levels of leadership buy-in as I see them. One is not buying in. So that's just saying no. Okay, so that's not buy-in. So we put that one over the side. That's an easy one. Okay, they just don't want it. There's buy-in in words only. Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Let's do it. And yet there's no participation by leadership. So everyone else go to the training, everyone else do that. So that's one that I've experienced over the years. The other one is where they say yes, they buy in, and it ends when the program ends. Right. And so that might be a little bit on the consultant's challenge or the internal team by not supporting and building out something longer. And then the third one I'm going to share, and then I'd love to hear Sejal, your experience in the spectrum, is I've seen like the opposite, where there's too much buy-in. And I'm not saying this is for everybody, but I've been in enough companies as a consultant where the leader will make everybody read a book that the leader feels is awesome. Sometimes what I've seen is they force that and project that onto everybody without fully understanding it or recognizing that it's going to be the best fit for the culture that they want to create. It just inspired them. And it's hard to push back on that if you're not the leader, because a lot of people don't feel comfortable telling the leader that, I don't know if that book's actually right for us. It might be right for you, but it might not be right for us. So that's what I see. What have you experienced?
Yeah, no, those are all great. And I think the biggest one that I've run into over and over again is just inadequate resources, right?
Same one.
Yeah, it's just like, they fail to provide the necessary, putting the time, the energy, and the money, because it is an intentional process. It's not just going to happen by itself. And I know I've seen those situations too that you talked about, where the leadership or the one leader is trying to shove what they think is important down everyone else's throats. And we both know that doesn't work as well. Right. And one of the reasons why I chose this specific series to kick it off with, because I think at Nobody Studios, for people that are not familiar with studios, we've talked about this a lot on our prior culture live streams. We are really good about making sure that we support our team, right? So help building the team. So, for example, every week we have a different Ovations speaker come to our team meetings, right? We've been doing that for quite some time.
It's awesome.
Who talks on a variety of topics, culture related and not, innovation, all different topics. But all of these people come from all different backgrounds and cultures and have diverse perspectives. And it challenges us to look at things from a different perspective, right? And we do that every week. And then we have our Nobody Nexus events that we do every month, right? And this is something where I really use these opportunities to not only build the stronger connections, but really expose the team to different topics that I think I like to say basic, but really need more reinforcement, right? Like at the last one, I really had us focus in on listening, truly listening to one another. That's a skill that every leader, regardless of where you're located, really needs to get good at, right? And so we challenge our leadership team. And the reason why I liked your program, because I've seen a lot of different cultural programs. I do trainings, you do trainings. We know a lot of people that do. So I've sat through a lot of them. And I haven't even finished yours. I started it and I got through the first few lessons, right? And I already knew this is perfect for our team, because when I talk about inadequate resources, we have to remember we all learn differently. And so we all know it's not a one-time thing. We do one workshop and now our culture is great. That's not the way it works. But I like how we've set it up. And so what we've done is we're going to be doing this in a 3-part series. And everybody, and Michael has been so gracious to give everybody access to the program to support our team. And then everybody gets a workbook so that they can do some of these practical work through, reflect on things, do these exercises as they're sort of going through these modules on their own. And then we come together as a team and we go deeper into this conversation. So I think it allows for people, regardless of your learning preference or how, timing can be an issue when you're dealing with geographical distances and getting everyone together, just on a weekly basis is hard enough. But we want to make sure people have time to do these, right? And so let's jump right into the program, because I know like when I was talking about this to people, they were really interested in hearing about some of the topics that we're going to be covering during the 3-part series. So if you can give us a sneak peek.
The way we broke it down was each module, which it's self-directed. So if you actually sat through each module straight through, each one runs about 30 minutes. Obviously, there's time to contemplate things, so it can be longer than that. But if you actually were like, okay, I got to get through this. And so each module focuses on the 3 aspects of the method, right? So the first module is recognize, the second module is open your mind, and the third module is identify, and identify is how you adapt your responses. So in the first module, it's really around self-awareness, right? It's trying to recognize your mental models, the way you see the world, right? Also looks at 4 stages of awareness, so you can understand where you're at in different times of your life and different experiences, and how you can move through each stage as needed. It also looks at some of the biases you might have as you recognize kind of your own way of thinking. And it's kind of based in one of my favorite kind of quotes over the years from, your prophets of the world, for going back millennia, which is the greatest gift you can give to humankind is your own self-awareness. And so that is kind of the basis of that, which is just showing people different ways, right? A lot of times in these programs, and a lot of these times when we kind of look at books and stuff, thought leaders who are wonderful, but they're very much concerned with sharing the way. And I always find that to be a conflict and friction point with adult learners. What are you telling me? It's the way, right? It's comforting to know it's the way, but I really haven't found that there's one way. There's just many different ways, and that's what we like to share in the program. So we give people in that first module different ways of recognizing the way they see the world. That's it. Yeah. So that's the first one.
I'm just going to stop you there for a second, because he said it's 30 minutes. And the way that I envision it, it's way more than 30 minutes, right? That's why I haven't finished the whole course yet. Yeah, you've done an excellent job. And it's, and you bring up a good point. I'm going to remind the team next week at the meeting that this is not something you just sit down and go through in 30 minutes. Like we really want you to reflect, do the exercises, and it takes time. For it to be effective. Yeah. And like I said, I've gone through, I think I had you check last time, like how far, but I'm still thinking about the activities, right? Like, for example, I wrote this one down as I was preparing for today, because I wanted to have you share a couple of the activities. Yeah. There's a lot, but the one that I'm still thinking about is, are you aware that you are aware? Right. And that one just has me thinking.
Michael Pollan, who's an amazing author, wrote a book called Change Your Mind, right? Around his experience with psychedelics and different things, and that's one of the names of his chapters, right? And he took it from other places as well. But I always said, "Are you aware that you're aware?" But I don't know if I can even talk about that one because it's such a deep one. But it's a great one, yeah. But those are the kind of things where we do put things in there to get people to contemplate and think about it. And back to your point of the culture that you're crafting here, Sejal, around exposure. The learning experiences we have as being nobodies, we get exposed to a lot, which is a wonderful gift, right? And the exposure is step one. And this is what we do with our Ovation speaker each week for people. So, is we have these great speakers come in and they share these different perspectives on a wide variety of topics. And that gives us exposure. But then afterwards, we discuss. Right, we discuss and go, oh, how did that resonate? And that was interesting. And then we can take it further in our team development sessions. And the same thing goes with this cultural intelligence. Is we're going to give people exposure to look at it by themselves with their own minds. Then we're going to get together and discuss it and see how it resonates and how it relates to things on our day-to-day working and our personal lives. So those two things are kind of where we're at. So yes, are you aware that you are aware? So where does that leave you? Are you?
I'm still reflecting on it. And honestly, I started a diary, started jotting down my thoughts as I was going through the program, because a lot of it was resonating with me. And obviously, as you know, I love this stuff. This is like my love language, right? So I get into it probably really well. But I loved about how you set up the program too, is there's not only a lot of self-reflection, but it's also a lot of doing, right? So it's not just that you're sitting there and reflecting for days and days and days. You could do that for as long as you want. Like I have been on this one activity just because I'm fascinated by it, right? And it's helping me evolve. But also then you're actually inviting people to try different things, right? And to actually go outside of their comfort zone a little bit. I wanted you to talk about the other two modules, but also share maybe a couple of the activities for people so they get an idea of what are some of the things that we're going to be doing in the series.
Yeah, for sure. So when we're looking at that recognized modules, is kind of like I said, looking at your self-awareness, and then O goes to open your mind. And then in order to open your mind, one of the things that we want to look at is different ways of doing the way, what we've always done, right? And so in that one, we have some scenarios and some questions about what you think about something if it's done this way or that way. And some basic stuff, might be the more kind of cross-cultural things that you see with people, which is anything from what's your reaction when someone might burp after a meal, right? And most people will be like, oh my God, that's so rude. And then we'll say, okay, actually that is true. But in some places they might see it as a compliment to the chef. Could be something as simple also as what's your reaction if you're hosting somebody and the guest offers to help you clear the table after dinner. Something that might be, people would be like, oh my God, of course, that would be amazing. I would expect them to do that. And I might actually be upset if they don't. And then we might share the side, say yes. And in another scenario, it might be considered extremely rude. And that might cause people to be like, why is that? Well, if I, as a guest, offer to clear the table, I might be saying that you as a host haven't provided an environment to make me feel completely like a guest. Mm-hmm. And so those are the kind of things where we think small little situations just to get people to be like, oh, open your mind. Oh, maybe there is a different way to look at that. So we do some of those. And then we also do some stuff around auditory, hearing things. And then actually, when you actually hear it again, realize that when people made you aware of it, you're hearing a whole sound that you didn't hear and your brain omitted it the first time, right? So it's a similar version to having some perceptual blindness sometimes when we can't see something even though it's actually there. And that just helps us understand our brains. And really, rather than just going, wow, isn't that interesting? We try to get people to understand the science behind it so they can actually start to be more aware of it for the next time. But it's just priming people to ask that question, did I miss something? Could I possibly have seen something or not seen something that might have been there? And just by giving people that opportunity to ask that question, we find primes you to kind of see things in more than one way. And the core of that whole module is tolerance for ambiguity, right? The ability to see more than one way in a similar situation, or maybe no way, right? Which is sometimes disconcerting for folks, but super helpful.
Yeah. And practice the pause, people. Right. I mean, that really is it. Is a lot of times we get that initial judgment or assumption we make about somebody because of our limited life experiences. Right. And down and tell us about the last section.
Yeah. The I, to your point, it's giving yourself that pause button. Whoa.
Yeah.
I feel like that person's being aggressive. Whoa. That's my recognition. I'm feeling like they're aggressive. Pause. Open my mind. I wonder if that's their intention. Are they intending to be aggressive right now? Right. So that's my O. And then the I's identify how you can adapt your response. So instead of me raising my voice, calling them out, pointing my finger to say, hey, why'd you get angry? I'm going to take a breath and I'm going to say, what's your reasoning for asking that? Mm-hmm. Right. And that's how we look to identify and adapt our response. And that module is really giving people a spectrum of specific situations that we face on a day-to-day basis that we might rush to judgment, and give them some opportunities to possibly adapt the responses to those situations to kind of alleviate potential friction moments and have more connections versus those crashes, right? Mm-hmm. That's kind of like, that's the goal of it. And so back to the reason of making it, which was a lot of people react when they move overseas and live overseas, and they don't have that opening ability to see things in a different way. But the longer they spend in different countries or with different people, different companies, cultures, what have you, the greater your exposure to opportunities to adapt your response if you are open to them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love how you put it all together, because I think no matter what kind of organization you are, like what your business goals are, what your mission or your values are, I think this program can help any organization. But specifically for us at Nobody Studios, right? Like I said, I've looked at a lot of different programs, and this one really is, I feel like, aligned with the fact of we have this big mission that we want to accomplish. We need to get our teams to be high performing and know how to adapt their own responses to people who may think differently than them, right? And so what are some of the like outcomes that you've observed with teams who have implemented this program? And how do you think it's going to really help our team specifically at Nobody Studios?
I think it'll just enhance the already strong communication we have. But one of the hallmarks I've seen of startups, having worked with lots of startups over the years, from the leadership perspective, founders mostly, is the startups shift their culture when they go from the first few founders to 15 to 50. 60 is a big inflection point for many of them, and 100, right, as you tend to grow. And what we found, at least for this program for sure, is one, if you have a multicultural staff, which most of us do, because we could say there's so many different cultures in any group that we belong to, but the tolerance for ambiguity, right? There's a lot of ways of doing things and different ways of doing things in the startup world. And so I find that groups that have a very fixed mindset about things can have challenge in that growth. And the ones that have the more fluid mindset, which is really what the program is bringing about, and high degrees of self-awareness, is very much one of the drivers. So Dave, yeah, great. Growth of anything is constrained by the limits and the mindset of the top leader. Beautiful, wonderfully said, right? And then take a look at it, that growth of anything is constrained by the limits and the mindset of the top leader. We are all our own. That's how I would look at that. It's going to help us for sure. And then with other organizations, sometimes people aren't even aware of the way they're thinking. And so just giving them that shift and that gift to become more aware, that pays it forward to the next person. And so I think at the very least, when we see organizations go through it, their staff, their teams become more self-aware, which allows them to give that gift.
Thank you, Dave, for joining us. He's been a supporter of the studio for a while now, and I'm looking forward to seeing what we do together. But he said, define your process and then follow it, right? And that really is the truth. I mean, everything you say makes sense to me, Michael, right? Because it's like, if leaders don't demonstrate that they're open, that they're curious, and they're adaptable, then they can't be the role models that the rest of the people are going to need. Their behavior, whether you like it or not, influences directly or indirectly everybody else. And so I think as leaders, we have to be culturally intelligent, especially for our venture studio. So I know we're getting close to time, but I did want to ask you this one last question. What advice do you have for the founders that are watching, or the leaders that are watching, who want to embed cultural intelligence into their team's DNA? Like, where do they start? What do you recommend for them?
Yeah, so I've seen the spectrum too. I've worked with startups who, like, day one, they got their book of values and behaviors, and I'm not saying that's wrong. Sometimes it's really good to look at it. They morph and shift, and then I've also seen founders who wait a long time to do that and might have achieved success. So I don't know if there's an exactly right kind of time to do it. I do think the right thing is to be mindful of it. And so if we're talking to founders there who were like, oh, I want to cultivate a culture of, that's the question. What kind of culture do you want to cultivate? I want to cultivate a culture of inclusion. Excellent. What does inclusion mean to you? I want to cultivate a culture of high performance. Oh yeah, who doesn't? What does that mean to you? And again, we always fill those buzzwords in there, but I think that's a good place to start, rather than saying we want to create a great culture, we want to create a high performing culture. Great, define it, and then then work backwards from there. And what this program does for people, and there are other ones like that, is just, again, back to that self-awareness piece. That's going to allow people to recognize, hey, the behaviors that I'm engaging with are actually not creating that culture that we are looking to define. And this might be the leader realizing that. So that self-awareness, again, that's your first step. Recognize, then give them the ability to open and identify. So yeah, that would be my suggestion. But always clearly define what it is that you want to cultivate, and then get clarity and specificity around that word.
I love that you start with definition, because I'm a big stickler on that. Whenever I'm working with a leader, I have to start with the basics. And sometimes I feel like a broken record, Michael, because I'm like, well, okay, that's your core value. What do you mean by that? And then I get this look like, doesn't everybody know what that means? And I'm like, no. Everybody doesn't know what that means, because that one word can mean like 100 different things. And if you've got 100 different people who have attached a different meaning to it, and they don't understand what the shared meaning is, now you've got everybody going in different directions, right? And so how do we measure, for example, at the studio, right? We want innovation. We have to build 100 companies. And so how do we measure the innovation impact of our culture related efforts? Like, how do we measure that, right? Because I think numbers say a lot, but you can't just rely on numbers. I mean, Mark McNally, our chief nobody, and I just talked about this on the Making of a Nobody a couple of weeks ago about how do you measure culture and its impacts. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that real quick.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, it's part of the challenge, right? For those of you in learning and development and training and leadership development, like a lot of times you get pushback from clients, internal, external. It's like, well, what's the ROI? What's the ROI on your ROI course, Michael? It's it's sometimes hard to measure, right? Because you're like, well, so one thing that I like to look at is some ways around evaluations prior, right? Which is what was people's knowledge prior to going through, right? When you ask them questions related to what the learning was going to be and then what it's going to be after, right? So those are some things that help out, especially in this kind of program. But when it comes to like the culture in general, how do we evaluate if our culture is being successful? I think goes back to your specificity question, which are really huge. So keep that broken record coming because people operate in general terms, right? It's so hard. And then when you get them specific, they don't like it because you're pushing them, but you're forcing them to think, and that actually is the benefit there. So one of the things that I've seen from an innovation creativity is if we want to cultivate a culture of innovation, how will we know that we did it? And that's your question, right? Mm-hmm. How will we know? And then if you've answered those questions, then you can look back and go, we know that we did it because of all the things we achieved related to our definition around innovation. So that's how I would start, rather than just say, yeah, we're going to be a real innovative culture. Great. How are you going to get there? I don't know. We'll just innovate, right? We'll be super creative. Okay. So that's how I look at it.
Don't rely on just the metrics. I think the qualitative aspects, especially when we're talking about culture, mean a lot. You know, I mean, yes, we build feedback into everything that we're trying to do, and we definitely are taking that feedback and reiterating. One of the things, and I wanted to highlight for everybody, is these kind of programs are not a one and done thing, right? This is the first series we're kicking off. And then I'm already working on what we're going to be doing next, right, for the next year. Yeah. But I think it's important to get that feedback. Going back to what you were talking about is we don't want to take in content or materials or topics that we think are important just as leaders, but really make it relevant to the people that are going to be going through the program, right? And so this was one that I've been priming since our last conversation with the team on, let me know what are some of the topics you're interested in learning about, what you're doing. And you've just packaged it all in a good format that I was like, this captures a lot of the things that the team has already come to me and said, we want to learn more about these topics. And so we've got a lot of people joining us. This conversation is definitely resonating, Michael. Clint Hatton is another supporter, and I love what he wrote. He goes, you absolutely can. That's what an excellent culture has been doing for over 30 years. We need to do all the people stuff and have the data-driven processes to measure it. And I think now with technology, Michael, it gets a little bit easier to leverage data and look at data and see how that can help us, right? But I think there's nothing better, honestly, than having one-on-one conversations. I think that is really where, if you can create that safety where you could just call somebody up and say, hey, let's get together for a quick 15-minute call. Tell me what's going on. What are some things you're struggling with? What are your challenges? And really cultivate that one-on-one relationship. I find that is the best way to really know and get a pulse on whether you're succeeding in your culture or not, right? So any last words you want to add?
No, this has been great. Thank you for including me here. I would just say back to your word you just said, which is programs, books, trainings, again, in my opinion, are great primers. They prime thought, they prime things, but it's what happens after, which is vital, right? And I think that's where a lot of organizations and leaders fall short, is they project onto the book or the training as the check, and hey, you just went to the training. Why aren't you all like more diverse and inclusive now? Didn't you all go through that? And so I think that's what brings it alive is the after. So there's lots of ways to prime it, but don't rely on the priming as the solution.
That's right. It's a conversation starter, not the end, right? Exactly. Thank you so much, Michael. I'm so glad that you're part of the team. You're a valuable resource, and I'm really looking forward with collaborating with you on this. And I hope that the team comes out of this program and they're like, let's keep this going and let's meet every once a month and just keep dissecting it, because there's so much in there that we can literally do a once a month meeting and continue the conversation based on the excellent content that you're providing us with.
For sure. Let's look to book another one of these sessions 6 months or so when we're done, so we can let everybody know where we're at and how it went.
Agreed. Absolutely. Let's do it.
Yeah.
I love it when my guests want to come back on their own. This is like makes my job easy,
Watch out.
Michael.
They're done.
You know, if you're not subscribed to our LinkedIn page for Nobody Studios, that's where you can find out about our culture live streams and the upcoming ones, because we also have ones that we do on Friday that are different than the culture series. So make sure you subscribe on our LinkedIn page so you know of all of our upcoming live streams. Thank you again, Michael. I'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.